Hello, everyone. Welcome to Regen Farmers Mutual's Beef Insetting Program Roundtable. We expected only a sort of 30 people could register, and we had more people register than we were able to take. So, thank you for those that are attending, and thank you for those that are no doubt going to listen to the recording but haven't been able to attend. So, I'm going to start by setting a bit of a context around beef insetting programs. And to do that, I'm going to use a virtual whiteboard. And you'll probably get sick of this virtual whiteboard, but I guess it starts with a bit of a discussion about Regen Farmers Mutual and why should you be listening to with us and co-designing with us today. I guess it stems back historically in 2020. This all started with co-design. In fact, at that point, we were thinking it would be called the Protected Habitat Farmers Mutual. And it was very unique circumstances. We had COVID, and that enabled us to get farmers from all around Australia to be co-designing. And being online to see their grandkids meant that they could also be online to use a Miro board. And we asked the question in a cooperative development program, is there a space for a farmer-owned piece of infrastructure that can help farmers navigate the environmental and the agricultural markets? And that was in response to a lot of perverse outcomes that were being reported around carbon markets. I wish I could say those perverse outcomes had disappeared. And the perverse outcomes that had happened when we financialized water markets. And so we had another bit of secret sauce in 2020. Myself, I've been fortunate to be the son of one of the early pioneers in teaching what we now call Regen Ag, and I've had 30 years of watching people's sort of transition from conventional to regen farmers. And I've also had this parallel universe where I've been involved in setting up crowdfunding legislation and local economy things like ethical fields, FOFO local, and was able to set up an incubator for co-ops in 2017, where I met actually the co-founder of Regen Farmers Mutual with me, Rowan Clark. And Rowan had this incredible background that he could bring to the co-design as we were discussing what farmers could do collectively to own infrastructure that assisted them. And that's because he'd spent an enormous amount of time in financial markets and was at that point working at looking at markets beyond carbon for the Victorian Trust for Nature. And so had really applied a markets lens to environmental products and was one of the first to bring a deep skill set to that. Well, at the end of 2021, we did a crowdfunding in order to launch what was then going to be called Regen Farmers Mutual. And that took up 148 small shareholders, mostly farmers and urban, concerned, who were impressed by the fact that farmers wanted to own their own digital infrastructure as well as the social infrastructure and sort of negotiating power that came together. When we formed the Constitution, we baked in these principles around value creation for our farmers, data sovereignty, risk management, informed decision making, local expertise, shared learning, being user friendly, and being able to have high quality assurance, being collaborative in our natures, and members first. Moving forward to 2022, and I guess still to today, the big areas that we've been focused on are the landscape impact programs. So how do we get groups of farmers together to co-design what is the shared asset in their landscape? How do they, identify the land management units and the things that make economic and environmental sense in those areas? And then how do they bring the pools of capital around them to support them to scale those practices that make economic and environmental sense. We've also been developing a digital platform and a brand that goes beyond Regen Farmers Mutual to just Regen. And that enables us to sort of take on a kind of role where we're working for the brand of economic and environmental profitability for our members. So 2022, 2023, we were involved with a traceability grant with some really great people, Standards Australia, NRM Regions Australia, the Australian Farm Institute, GoSource, who've been an amazing resource because of their connection to the United Nations Transparency Protocol. And in that grant, we had to work out how do we help farmers individually and collectively within the landscape collect carbon emissions data and biodiversity data. So that worked through sort of the how to. Um, in 2024, we commenced a second traceability grant, again funded by the Department of Agriculture, again led by the Australian Farm Institute, but this time with GS1, the Digital Finance, CRC, and GoSource, again with their connection to the UNTP and ourselves. And in this case, what we're seeking to do is verify, and so we've been working with the likes of Greenhams and Tarosi and Rabobank to understand, okay, if we can make a verified emissions claim, what's the value of that to the IT department, the risk department, the marketing department? And how does it, technically happen that you can add claims and move digital product passports? So that's Regen Farmers Mutual and our progression over the last sort of 5 years. But what we're here today to talk about is beef insetting programs. And we can take a sort of view from what's happening overseas. So in Europe, this is the Lens network. And the idea of this diagram says it's perfectly. It's sort of top down where, the idea is to understand the business needs, gather the businesses in the beef supply chain wherever they are in that value adding process, build a technical and, complete requirement list for all of those stakeholders, and then magically engage service providers operating on behalf of farmers to design those cost interventions and offerings and meet those needs in the middle, and then cut a deal with these existing or soon to be created supply aggregators. So the risk or the alternate uh, way to doing a top-down sort of co-design that's been driven by individual actors or potentially collaborations of actors from who don't have the land resource themselves, is that you can end up with perverse outcomes for farmers. And so what we want to do is co-design an insetting program, and this is why we're here today, that enables farmers in a supply shed to identify, well, what are the environmental objectives for their landscape? To be able to then engage with the supply chains that pull food and fiber resources out of those landscapes and agree what are the common environmental goals. And to have those farmers and suppliers sort of understand the transactions that make economic and environmental sense and how to support and scale those across a landscape. So from 10 farmers to 20 to 30 to 40, or across the farm as you add more land management units that are undertaking that intervention. And so it then becomes, apparent that there is value to be shared in the supply chain as farmers are able to reduce the costs and impacts on climate and environment. And so how do those mechanisms evolve? That's what co-designing aims to achieve today. So, I'm going to stop there for a second, ask as many of you as are willing to come off camera to do a quick round of introductions because it's helpful when we're doing co-design to understand who's who in the room. Uh, if you would, what I'd like you to do is just say your name, your organization. And I was having an argument with my son. Um, we live in a vegetarian household, but because of he's just coming to 13, he's rebelling hard in a really useful way. So my favorite food has always been steak, and he is getting into steak in a massive way. We have to eat outside and it's freezing cold, but it's worth it. And we were having this argument about what is the best cut. And I was saying I like my New York cut, and he was saying he liked a big rump steak. And so I thought, given I've got the beef industry here around a co-design table, I might get you to also tell me your favorite cut. And then I could have a little poll going and I could tell my son with some definitiveness, the beef experts reckon this is the best cut. So your name, your organization, and your favorite cut. And I'm going to actually, get the person who's just answered that to pass the ball to somebody else. So for me, I'm going to say Andrew Ward, Regen Farmers Mutual, and I like the New York cut. And I'm going to pass to Rowan Clark, my colleague.
Lovely. So I'm Rowan. I'm the finance plan of Regen Farmers Mutual, and I'm an eye fillet man myself. Andrea.
Hi, Andrea Kosh from AgTech Ideation, and I was just looking up what the cut is for Osso Buco. I love all meat and I love all cuts, but I've just mastered cooking Osso Buco finally, so that's my current favourite cut. Someone else can say what the actual cut is.
Beef shin. It's
beef. There you go. Perfect, thanks.
And Andrea, could you pass the conch to someone?
I'm passing to Mary King.
I knew you were going to say that, Andrea. Hi, everyone. Mary King, even though the screen says Meredith. I go by Mary King. I'm the Sustainable Sourcing Manager for McDonald's, concentrating on agriculture. And you all know I'm going to say a Big Mac, don't you? That's my favourite cut. I'll pass across to Claire Money.
Mary, I want to know where you're sitting today.
Yeah, I'm in at Walsh Bay. I look like I'm down in the back trunk room. I know it's a little bit fresh down here, but I'm in Walsh Bay.
No, it looks like you're in a cattle pen. Anyway, Claire Marnie, currently I'm here at this forum wearing my current hat as the country manager for Athian. So Athian is an insetting marketplace and registry and currently operating in the US, and we're expanding it to Australia. So I'm doing a piece of work with the team over here. I'm with Rowan. I feel it, unless I can step outside of beef and say a rack of lamb. But yeah, if we've got to stick with beef, I'm with Rowan.
Would you mind passing the conch, Claire?
Just for a bit of gender diversity, I'll throw it to Matthew.
Thanks, Claire. Matthew Harrison, Tasmanian Institute of Agriculture in Launceston. I'm a professor of sustainable agriculture, and we do a lot of work on greenhouse gas emissions of the livestock sector, insetting, offsetting, carbon markets. For me, it would be definitely rump. There's less fat, less gristle, no bone, and probably medium, I would say. I think that's everything, Andrew. I'll pass to maybe Zoe Marshall.
Thanks, Matt.
Hi, Zoe Marshall. I'm a National Environmental Manager for Tarosi Foods. So we do a whole bunch of beef patties for a collective of different customers, so which is good. And I would have to say, I'd probably go eye fillet as well. And I will pass across to Jacob.
Thanks, Zoe. Jacob Petros, Manager of Sustainability Credentials and Beef Sustainability at Meat and Livestock Australia. And yeah, while I do love a Big Mac, Mary, and I feel that if Macca's can put that on the menu, that'd be great, thanks. And I'll pass to Katie McRobert. She knew I was going to throw her.
I really did. I was going to throw to you if it was me, so that's fair. Katie McRobert, I'm the Executive Director of the Australian Farm Institute, and we've done a lot of work with Regen Farmers Mutual, as Wardy pointed out earlier, on these traceability grants from our policy perspective and also helping to project manage. And the Farm Institute's job is to look at these policy levers that help enable sustainability across all aspects, not just environmental, but social and economic as well for Australia's farmers. I am embarrassed to admit to this particular group, I've got absolutely no idea what a cut of meat means. When somebody gives me a steak menu, I'm like, what is the nice one, please? But I did look up, one of my favorite ways to eat beef is tartare, and I've looked it up that is a tenderloin. So apparently I like tenderloin. Now I know. I will pass to Rowan. You haven't had a turn, have you? Oh, no, you have. Sorry, Lachlan Parker.
Hello, thanks for passing to me. My name's Lachlan. I am with an organization called BizCubed. We're working with PIX and GoSource to help with implementing UNTP. So our team has done a lot of the technical implementation of those things across a number of different projects and initiatives in the past. My favorite cut of steak is a flank steak, medium rare. Well, cut of beef. And I'm going to pass it across to Mr. Zachary Zeus.
Thanks, Lachlan. Zachary Zeus, CEO of PIX, working with GoSource and Regen on the UNTP implementation side of things. My favorite cut of steak is similar to Wardy, New York strip, and medium rare. I'll pass to Steve.
Thank you, Zach. Steve Capell, I'm founder of GoSource, but today I'm wearing a different hat, which is my volunteer role as Vice Chair at UNCFACT and Project Lead of the UNTP. Now, this is the awkward bit for this audience. I married a vegan 13 years ago, haven't had any meat for that long. So my favorite cut of steak is probably the one you all hate, which is the what's it called? The fake meat one.
Impossible Foods.
Yeah.
Plant-based steak.
Yeah.
It had to be someone.
It had to be someone. Sorry.
My favorite steak is really chicken, but don't tell the rest of them.
Steve, pass the conch. If you've got the energy.
I do. Oh, I'm trying to figure out who's left. I think has Michael Caboris been?
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Michael Caboris. I represent the Digital Finance CRC and leading a project called Impact X, which is a private alternatives market platform for high impact investments, and working with Rowan and Wardy here on how we can, maybe get to market some really interesting and novel investments. I like it. I'm actually based in Asia right now, so I like a short rib. They do a lot of Korean barbecue out here. So that's pretty good. They import a lot of Australian beef as well, of course. So I get the good stuff. Nice to meet you all.
And if you pass the conch, please.
Give it to as Matt Silver.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Matt Silver from Echidna Tree Guard. We make and sell livestock-proof tree guards, so very big supporter of the silver pasture concept for the livestock industry. I'm also on the advisory council for Regen Farmers Mutual, so I've been working with Wardy and Rowan a little bit on this beef insetting. My favourite steak would be a thick cut Scotch fillet. I love the steaks with a bit more fat on them, so a nice grass-fed Scotch fillet is my favourite. Kim, have you been?
No, thanks, Matt. I'll turn my camera on as well. Hi, I'm Kim from Ready to Adapt. I'm also a Regen advisor with Regen Farmers Mutual and sit alongside Matt on the Members Council. Now, my favourite cut of beef is actually a brisket done in a very slow, smoky barbecue that, just falls apart when you pick it up. So, yeah.
Would you like to pass the conch, please, Kim?
Oh, who's left? Peter Richardson?
Yep, I'm left. Hi, Peter Richardson. I'm from the Grant to Goulburn Group, which is a group of farmers in central Victoria that could be a candidate supply shed, I suppose, in the context of this conversation. My favourite cut of beef is beef cheeks. I like slow cooked beef cheeks.
And Peter, there's Vincentius, Ralph, Olivia, a fair few people left.
Oh, okay. I'll go for Vincentius.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Vincent, and I'm same as Lachlan. I'm a data engineer at BizCube, working with Pix and VoiceSource on the UNTP technical implementation. And for a favorite steak cut, not really sure, but I'm from Indonesia, and there's this food called rendang. It's quite a famous food, and I think I just looked it up. The cut it's using is the chuck portion. I'm not really sure, but yeah. Thank you.
Would you like to pass the conch to someone?
Yeah, who hasn't gone yet? Sorry.
Ralph or Olivia?
Yeah, I'll pass it to Olivia.
And Don.
Hi everyone, apologies I'm late and I've also got to leave early, but so I'm Olivia Lawson based in Central Victoria. We are cattle breeders and I have worked in an advisory capacity from a producer perspective for around 8 years, advising to industry in various capacities. I'm currently on the steering group for the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework and on a couple of boards, including not-for-profit Soils for Life, along with Amanda Rowan, who's here as well, which is great, and on a catchment management authority board as well.
Not very busy. What's that saying about you want something done?
Yes, I have had that thrown at me a few times.
Would you like to throw
to Ralph?
So Ralph Berrent, I'm Senior Specialist Climate Change with Agriculture Victoria, based out of Hamilton. Over the last few years, we've been doing farm emissions estimates for about 230 farmers around the state, including beef industry and across other industries. So favourite cut's Scotch fillet. I like partial to an eye fillet as well. So, okay. Oh, not sure who else is on.
Amanda, I think.
Amanda.
I'm Amanda Rowan. I'm based in Toogoolawah in southeast Queensland. Small scale beef producer, but I work really for myself as a consultant, leading beef producer groups across Northern Australia and with a special interest in leadership and sustainability. I also co-own a veterinary business with my husband. We've got 3 clinics in the southeast and work with beef producers there. And as Olivia mentioned, yeah, sit on the board of Soils for Life. So.
And Amanda Don is otherwise parading as Joanne tonight. Today.
Okay, and before I pass it on, I match Kim with my preference for brisket with a bit of salsa verde, smoky brisket with salsa verde. Don, over to you.
Oh, before we do that, I think, Olivia, I cut you off before you got to say your cut.
Yeah, that's okay. My favourite is probably a porterhouse or an eye fillet, always cooked medium rare. Thanks.
That was totally worth coming off. Over to you, Don.
Thanks, Roddy. Yep, Don Hearn's my name. Together with my wife, Jo, we own and run Jungle Lane Beef Company, which is we're certified organic beef producers, southern New South Wales, near Barham. Yeah, we've been producing beef boxes straight to customer for a while. So as far as favourite cut, having tried them all, I'm actually going to say it's more to do with how the cuts are cooked. And I probably honestly cannot put a favourite one on, because once you work out the good recipe to go with every single cut of beef in that animal, that's the favourite cut for me.
Excellent. Now, Nikita and Georgina, you're off camera, but if you're there, would you like to come off and or off mute and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nikita Ellison. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator at Nolan Meats. We're a beef processor in Queensland. And I agree with Don's answer that it is very hard to pick a favourite if they're all cooked well, but I'll probably have to go. I am definitely an eye fillet girl.
Hi everyone, Georgina Johnson. I'm an independent consultant, basically supporting and advocating for farmers' interests across supply chains in Australia. My focus at the moment is really on helping larger corporates get and understand Scope 3 emissions and how we sort of create more regenerated landscapes across Australia, but profitability focused. Excited. Oh, cut. Grass-fed and finished rump, medium rare, for sure.
Perfect. All right, I think the eye fillets have it though. Have I missed anybody who is on the call and hasn't had an opportunity to introduce themselves? No. Thank you, everybody. So we're going to go into another little phase now that we've got, at least names and faces and who's who in the zoo. We're going to actually go and have a discussion around, well, what are we proposing as a beef insetting program? So if you bear with me, I want to provide us with an example group of producer in order to sort of have this conversation. So with co-design, as we're hoping to do today, we need to give you some skeleton to work on to add like better value. If we're still agreeing what animal it is, it's not as helpful as trying to work out whether the animal's fit for purpose. So we're going to go through and meet Steph and Cam now. We've all introduced ourselves, but it's time to hear from some farmers.
Hello, it's Cam Stewart here. I'm at Looking Glass in Highlands, Victoria. So the property is about 1,400 acres, about 550 hectares. It's a lot of granite and a lot of large granite rocks sitting underneath the surface. It's rolling hills with a lot of swamps, and there's a lot of springs and water that's generated on the property. We operate a Angus cattle herd, about 200 cows, and we produce about 190 calves each year. And we also have some wethers, about 400 fine wool wethers.
We face challenges here, as do all other farmers, with climate change. Also the flow-on effects towards sort of markets, in our case with beef cattle, and what is expected of farmers and whether they need to offset emissions from the cattle or not. We are focused very much on regenerative farming, trying to improve the microbial activity in the soils. That is not just for our cattle and our sheep, but also for the biodiversity in the area.
From an emissions perspective, we've done a number of baseline assessments. We did one with Regen Digital, very clear from those assessments that the vast majority of the emissions come from methane from the cattle. So that's something that we are focused on. And in terms of trying to improve that, there's obviously improving the productivity of the cattle, but ultimately I think there will need to be some improvements in management of the methane and potentially carbon offset through sequestration and vegetation. For farmers who do take steps and are able to reduce their emission, it seems fair that they get compensated. I think the market will go that way anyway, because I think that the market will be prepared to pay more for beef that is carbon neutral, and that will hopefully lead to farmers taking steps that can compensate them for that. We do think that traceability and having a connection through to the market is something that is really important and will grow in importance going forward. And we'd also been early adopters of Regen Digital. We thought it would be really interesting to work on a landscape type environment as opposed to just your own farm.
Well, our dream for this property is to leave it in better shape than we found it, and generally just like to turn up and find that it's a flourishing environment, both from a farming perspective and from a natural perspective as well, with just sort of nature and a farming business entwined.
So talking with producers as I've been prone to for the last, you know, well, we've done 11 landscape impact programs, and there's 4 events per landscape impact program. So I've had 44 separate sort of town halls with farmers and their respective groups. What's become apparent is that we need a place to take off from, like to understand insetting in a really basic way. And one of the things that occurred was we were doing the environmental plantings carbon methodology and working out that 200 stems per hectare basically gave us the carbon yield, and that meant that we could start to also see the emissions from a cow being around 1.5 tons or 3 times its body weight every year, which was about a tree and a half at 200 stems per hectare. And so we started to be able to play with this idea of what if we had a very simple program. I just need to bring back the right window. Sorry. If we had a very simple program which enabled you to kind of go, well, if I've got 1 cow, I need to plant 1.5 trees. That's 2 cows, 3 trees. That's simple, that's farmer friendly. You can make it context specific rather. It's easily verified. It's a tree, right? Like some of these other verifications are very difficult. They're subjective, but a tree exists. It's a very tangible way of seeing a ton of CO2e. So if we're talking about Cam and Steph, and how do they make 200 cows, which is their breeding operation, carbon neutral by 2030? It's likely that they're already efficient producers, given their high rainfall compared to other beef producing areas. They are grass fed all the time. These 200 cows are unlikely to have, in the short term, a suitable sort of seaweed supplement. However, the likely nature of Cam and Steph is that they're early adopters. You know, they're part of a landscape impact program. They're active in their land care group. They've been involved with Regen Farmers Mutual for 18 months now. But they sort of understand that, you know, from their 200 cow herd, they need to plant about 300 trees in order to make that entirety carbon neutral. Now,
Just a quick question there, Andrew.
Yep.
So sorry to interrupt. The tree growth will probably be max at about 5 or 10 years and then diminish after that and be pretty low at maturity. So over what time was that?
I will totally dig into this because we're saying a tree to a cow and a half. Sorry, a cow to a tree and a half, as with a big asterisk around that. Like actual numbers will vary, but in simplicity terms, we're trying to say it's a tree and a half. Oh, sorry, 1 cow is 1.5 tons, which is about a tree and a half. 2 cows is 3 trees. And 200 cows is 300 trees.
Yeah, that'll be true for about 10 years, and then you'll need more trees after that sort of thing. That's the problem with relying on carbon in trees or soils. It plateaus after a while, whereas methane just keeps going up.
Well, as you'll see, we're trying to let's keep going, because I think I'm in violent agreement with you that this is a way of getting trees into the landscape. It's a way of being able to do a transition pathway for everybody. So let's compare for Steph and Cam. Are you guys seeing my thing? They're like 550 hectares. In order for them to do a tree planting, you know, under the environmental plantings 2024 method, the cheapest we can get it, like the smallest scale and still pay for the fences, is sort of 20 hectares or more. On this beef insetting program, they could do a 1.5 hectares per annum. So a totally different scale. The income from environmental plantings would be from generating accus that are sold from anywhere from $50 to $75. Whereas what we're talking about here is like potentially paying, $50 per tree to the farmer. The costs of environmental plantings projects are mainly borne upfront, fencing, prep, that sort of thing. And they're usually between 20 and 33% of the lifetime value of a 25-year project. Whereas the costs in the beef insetting program are the tree, the guard, the labour, replanting as required. But the labour, in environmental plantings, you're going to need a fencing crew, preparation, planting, probably technical advice around GIS and other areas. Whereas in this beef insetting program, 300 trees is something that the family can do on the weekend in a very targeted way. Under the environmental plantings method, the area that you can put trees into is prescribed by legislation. Whereas under the beef insetting program, the idea is that it could be targeted by the farmer to a need on their farm. Environmental plantings require a permanence of 100 years. Under the SBTI, the permanence around beef insetting is 20 years. The mechanism for environmental plantings, as mentioned, is the ACCU, which is equivalent to 1 tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent. What we're suggesting an inset mechanism could be is like a regen verified inset for 1 tonne of carbon dioxide emission equivalent. Overall, environmental plantings are a significant commitment, and they're the potential for income from doing, a sensible design that helps you lift productivity and generate biodiversity. But beef insetting program is at a much smaller scale, and it's more targeted to achieve specific on-farm goals. And legally, environmental plantings go on title, whereas what this is suggesting is a contract. And why would you want to plant a tree? Well, some people will want to plant trees to heal an erosion area or to create wind buffering because, livestock need shelter, or shade, or nutrient cycling, or planting trees to reduce salinity impacts, or paddock trees to increase biodiversity and enable you to have your birds be able to move from different patches. There are a whole bunch of reasons that most farmers, whether it's fencing a dam and then providing 300 trees around it, makes sense both for production and for biodiversity, and in this case, to enable them to do carbon projects. So I wanted to start with an example that we could all kind of conceive of as we work through today. The other thing that I wanted to just make mention of is that, it's not just about it being suitable to your goal, as an individual farmer. We can scale these opportunities into the landscapes where farmers take them up. And we know through landscape impact programs, farmers getting other farmers on board is so much easier than big food and beef producers trying to get direct farmer relationships. Farmers already are social animals, and that, they're asking themselves, well, how do we deal with what looks like, it'll be an approach from an abattoir, an approach from a processor, an approach from a consumer brand, an approach from Coles and Woolies. There could be 14 approaches to them. How can they put forward something that others can then participate in? And that's where we get to this idea of we need something that's simple, farmer friendly, context specific, easily verified and real. And yes, the headline might say 1 tree equals 1 tonne, and the headline might say 1.5 trees per year per cow, but it's not actually. In fact, every farm that will participate in this will need verified emissions claim for the use of calculating their whole of farm, and we will go into detail on that. And in terms of the trees, as Matt quite rightly alluded to, the nature of the way in which we calculate this. So you could use full cam to SBTI conversions. You could use other Vera or gold standard or sustained cert or other reconcilable activities that are SBTI compliant. But the idea of this program is really just to acknowledge that we're all learning how to deal with what's coming up. So we're right here, I believe, on the bleeding edge around sustainability reporting. It's going to start with carbon emissions, but it'll likely include animal welfare and a whole raft of ESG things over the time. Everybody, including farmer awareness, buyer aggregation, we're all at the start of a learning curve. So this idea that we're putting forward is not a permanent program, but something that can run for 3 to 5 years as we look for early adopters like the Cam and Steph of this world to reward them for putting trees into the landscape, for replanting often over-cleared environments that are typical from southern Queensland along the west fall of the Great Divide all the way down to Victoria. And what we're suggesting is that this 3 to 5 year planting program will require 5 years to establish the trees, which will all be provided with, RFIDs and satellite, to get to the point that they're very easily verified through a 15-year permanence to give a 20-year life to the contract that's between the farmer and Regen Farmers Mutual, which, as we'll talk about later, is the counterparty. So at this point, I might just check in. Screaming questions. Otherwise, the next, just frame up what we're going to do next is go through a farmer workflow. So what is it like for the farmer to participate? And at that point, I might also invite Katie to talk about, AASF and traceability and what the Australian Farm Institute sort of policy looks like in that space that the farmer is operating on. And then secondly, I want to bring it in from the beef, after we've done the farmer workflow. Let's look at it from the buyers, which is the beef supply industry, or anybody who has an interest in the carbon emissions verified claim and may be participants in an insetting program. And at that point, I'm going to probably ask Steve and Zach to provide some context to the group about UNTP, what a supply chain is versus a supply shed. So there are, but before we get into detail around the farmer and detail around the buyers, is everybody understanding the concept of co-design? Has anybody got any initial questions that are burning? Don't be shy. I need this to be interactive or you'll fall asleep. It's standing in front of a mirror otherwise. Andrea, thank you.
Hi, Woody. Yeah, so just wanted to clarify that this is conceptual. What you've presented is conceptual at this point. And also, and you might cover this off be covering this off in the next little section, is what's the ask of us as a group today in the co-design process?
Yeah, so great. It is conceptual at the moment. We have some elements which are real, but we've not cobbled this together into a product. In fact, we've always been kind of led by this co-design ethic that Rowan is an ex-investment banker in conservation finance and member-owned junkie. And I'm Regen Ag and startup and entrepreneur. But by no means do we understand the beef industry as well as other people. So bringing everybody today to around the table is our attempt to provide a skeleton under which we think things could work. But the invitation will be to have people identify risks that we've not looked at, opportunities that we've not thought of, to bring up objections that parties might have that will help us to learn how to shape this so it can go from concept into what the ask at the end of this 2 hours will be an invitation for those that are interested to go into the scope phase. And the scope phase will quantify a lot more detail around what the next phase looks like. This is concept, and we're inviting input from people and hopefully providing a safe place and a good environment to do that from. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
And I guess to that point, is it clear that we are inviting a ground up response, which may be a bit different to that European top down response? But it's in response to the fact that we've had farmers say, we don't want 15 programs. We want something that works in our landscape. And planting trees works in our landscape for salinity or for erosion control or for biodiversity benefit. And if we could just be rewarded for planting trees, and then that sort of aha moment that if we reduce or sequester carbon on the whole of farm, all of these other actors who draw beef from that environment, they're getting the benefit of that ton not being, or either in the farm or being sequestered on the farm. And so we're really trying to say, it's so tangible, it's such a simple departure point, but there are other things that will come up. In the next 3 to 5 years, everybody's going to work out market dynamics that we can't possibly know. But we can't wait for perfect, and we can't wait for top down. We need, I think, a farmer-led response. And so you're being asked to put your various perspectives on, but to support a farmer-led proposal. Yo, Jacob.
Thanks, Andrew. All for farmer-led proposal. I'm just curious if the consultation and the people in the room if that has happened. There are some representative bodies such as Cattle Australia or the state farming organisations and the like that if it is to be industry owned and industry accepted, probably need to be involved pretty early on. There are a lot of these programs out there in development and coming through coming through that are going to confuse a lot of producers, I guess, the more and more developed. And industry is looking at ways to start verifying the ways of environmental and sustainability credentials into a standard, so they are verified. So I just wanted to raise that should be done pretty early on in this. Otherwise, Regen Farmers Mutual will run the risk of developing something which may not be fully accepted by the industry. So it would just be good to try and figure out a way to include that in the design.
That's exactly the reason for having a co-design today, Jacob.
And just looking around the people in around, like fantastic minds in the room, brilliant, but it's a representation level that I think we're lacking a bit here.
Great point. And I think that when we say farmer-led and farmer-designed, we're taking for granted that people understand that we're a cooperative, a mutual that's owned by our farmer members, right? And so what's being put up is something that instead of it being, for example, Zoe, sorry to use Tarosi coming to farmers, or McDonald's Meredith coming to farmers, or Coles coming to farmers. What we're saying is we can, as a collective, verify our claims, as we'll talk to technical stuff in a second. And when you're investing in farmers that are planting trees that are monitorable from space, it's Regen that's taking a brand risk there as the representative of farmers, as opposed to each brand running greenwash risk or running, different uncoordinated programs. Having a farmer-owned program, I don't know whether Cattle Australia, we haven't had the conversation, are the organisation to do that. But I do know that a member-owned mutual like ourselves, when we're responding to what we're hearing from our members in each of those landscapes, that's sort of what's driving us to come up and propose a program. Yeah. Katie, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Woody. I just, partly for me, but also for others on the call, for people who've been working in this space, just to have you articulate as clearly as you can the differentiation between what you're proposing for your beef insetting program focused on trees, how that differs from the carbon plus biodiversity pilots that have been run in the past by ANU, and how this is different from a cattle farmer holding on to ACCUs that they've created under an existing carbon method. So just that clear point of differentiation as a UVP. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, sure. So like the carbon plus biodiversity thing that's come through is still related to the clean energy regulator and emissions reduction fund methods. So the one you could do today is environmental plantings 2024. And we support farmers all across Australia to engage with planting trees. But the minimum scale economically that makes sense is sort of 20 hectares. Now that is often, expensive in terms of opportunity costs, but also upfront costs in terms of the cash flow. And we talk to farmers that are mainly sort of north of 50K, south of 2 million a year turnover. They're not corporate as in north of 2 million or large horticulture or irrigated crops. They tend to be beef producers that are sort of 200 to 2,000 head sort of is the sort of area that we find a lot of our producers, family farm style. Yeah. And so those family farms engaging in environmental plantings, 20 hectare minimum, upfront cost, 25-year commitment, 100-year permanence, goes on title. It's a whole bunch of resistance to engaging with carbon markets under the ACCU scheme, even though we're supporting a lot of farmers to do that. But every farmer I know is like, I'd love to put a couple of trees over there for a windbreak or put a couple of trees in there to create an erosion control measure or put in a couple of trees, just for paddock trees for biodiversity benefit. And if they could be doing that with the family on a weekend as a way to get 100% carbon neutral beef, there's an appetite for that extends beyond the appetite of putting 20 hectare plus environmental plantings in the ground. All right, should we talk to the farmer flow? I also see there's some chat going on. Rowan, are you all over the chat? Yeah, cool.
Can I ask the question,
Peter?
So are you saying that the basic premise, I guess I'm just trying to ask, is the basic premise that you're putting here that you would have by lowering the level of integrity, if you like, for want of a better term, you can scale down in an economic way that will work for all parties? Is that?
Yeah, I don't know if it's lowering the integrity because the nature of planting a tree that's RFID tagged and monitorable by satellite and under a commercial legal contract between the farmer and the mutual and has consequence, like economic consequence. I don't know if there can be a doubt about its integrity, right? So it's not necessarily lower integrity, but it isn't using the mechanism of turning a ton of carbon into a financial product, which is what an ACCU is, which is what is produced if you do environmental plantings or any agricultural or vegetation method with the clean energy regulator. And it's that market, which is 20 hectares or more. And it's quite a permanent sort of decision. But in this case, I think you've still got all the integrity. You're not talking about something that's subjective. There's either a tree there or there's not.
But we're not going to wrap as much audit and scrutiny and rules around the whole thing to give the same level of guarantees.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for comparison on scrutiny, Environmental Plantings 2024 has an alternative assurance model that if you're under 200 hectares, requires no audits at all. And they're at the Clean Energy Regulator satisfied with the fact that you can see after 8 years these trees from space. And so there is no need for an audit system. If the trees are taken out, they will see it with Planet, which is the GIS software, and then you'll be subject to the rules that relate. The same goes here. We can take that same level of confidence under 200 hectares that you can see trees from space, especially if you RFID tag them. Yeah. Let me go through the farmer workflow for you guys and how we are envisaging that. So sorry, just needing my mirror to catch up. Here we go. So if we're starting on the left here with farmer discovery, they need to get membership of the mutual, join the beef insetting program. What that looks like is, we have a bunch of projects. I can show you the detail of this later. But they'll basically see that they can be loaned $50 per tree, which they get 50% at planting and 50% after year 5. There's a terms and conditions, and we can talk to those in detail later. But then what the farmer does is they calculate their carbon emissions, and that helps them select the volume of emissions to inset. Now, they might want to inset 100% of their 200 cows, or they might want to inset 10%. But they could select the volume that, we're looking to set. And then they have the opportunity of verifying those emissions. Now, I'll get Steve and Zach to talk to verified claims shortly. Then they are submitting a project planting plan. So what are they going to use the trees for, right? And they've got to think about that in terms of designing for the end state. So is it around erosion? Is it around dams? Is it for nutrient cycling? Is it for wind or shade or biodiversity? And there will be a financial model that they need to consider. They also need to consider what offer is available to them in their landscape. And that offer might depend on what buyers in the beef supply chain are participating in the program. The farmer will then need to, understanding why they're planting that tree and where they're planting that tree, they might actually decide that there are a bunch of options to start doing tree growing enterprises. And we can talk to those. We've certainly had some conversations internally about that. What we'd like to do is see the farmer source their trees in their garden, source their labor, and then they're planting their tree. At this point, when they accepted the terms and conditions, they were given a project management module. They were given financing. They've assigned the rights of their verified claim to the mutual so that we can act on their behalf as a member-owned organisation. We will definitely go into those terms so you can see what the deal is for the farmer. But that has then enabled the mapping for the carbon abatement over the proposed area, what number of trees and what tree stock selection, and that determines that we need to provide X number of RFIDs. So these are thumbtack RFIDs. They're about 3 cents per RFID. And what a farmer is required to do when they plant is take a photo and input the RFID, which will feed directly into our project management software for the beef insetting program. So in year one, they'll get their payment, which will usually cover the direct costs of the planting of the trees, the guards, etc. In fact, the most expensive guard that I've seen is like $30, and the most expensive sort of 15-inch tube stock is like $8. So your most expensive design is like $38. So we have to probably look through the maths of that. The other thing that the RFID and the photo and having a digital twin, like through their membership of the mutual, enables is that you have all of these observable data points now. So you can use whatever additional technology exists on that farm. Drones, aircraft, satellite can all pick up the presence of those trees once they're once they're actually established. So in year one, we're proposing there'd be 300 trees Cam and Steph would do, and they'd get payment for that in year one. In year two, they'll be monitoring year one. There might be some replants, but then they'll be planting year two. Again, in year three, they'll be monitoring. There might be some replants, but they'll be planting year three. And at that point, unless we're going to go out and do, greater duration than 3 years, maybe we decide collectively to do 5 years, that would extend everything. But on the assumption that we're only doing 3 years and that replants have occurred, by sort of year 5, they're getting the second half of the payment. Now, that payment might end up being a loan on eligible expenses. It might be adjusted as we do co-design. But I guess the key things to identify for you each before we go to questions are the indicative terms. So as a farmer, you would be faced with, becoming a member of the mutual. You're going to plant trees and make every reasonable effort to keep them alive, including replanting if required. You'll attach an RFID to every tree that you either plant or replant, and you'll manage the trees across the term of the agreement in accordance with the digital platform. And then you'll assign the verified claim of the reduction to Regen Farmers, who'll dispose of it at that discretion. Regen Farmers will lend the equivalent of the $50 per tree that you plant. This facility can be drawn down to establish, maintain, replace, monitor the trees. We'll provide the RFID, provide you with the project management tools, monitor the growth of the tree over the term of the agreement, calculate the carbon sequestered by the trees using a full CAM model to ensure the measurements are SBTI compliant. That should have an asterisk on it. Extinguish your loan when the sale of the verified claim of reduction. And then additionally, something that can happen through the mutual, because we'll just be crediting and debiting their member account, is we can pay any surplus of the beef insetting program as a bonus to the producers. So at this point, I might stop and ask for questions, particularly from the producers. So Don, Kim, I know you've got cattle, Amanda, Claire, those.
Amanda, question into the chat, Wardy. Have any has been modelled outside of environmental plantings, e.g. improved herd efficiency, improved herd fertility?
Yeah, so I think that there's a whole bunch of interventions to put into an insetting program. So I know, for example, that where Amanda and Caitlin from Toogoolawah, their problem in the environment isn't really improved by adding more trees. Actually, they've got a need to get rid of some trees. And so, unfortunately, in this context of like getting started on the adoption curve, planting trees is something that's tangible we can do now. We can all agree a tree's a tree. The beef herd efficiency model, seaweed as a supplement or, equivalent if it's rome, fungal bacteria, all of those other interventions that could also either reduce or remove soil carbon fertility improvements, using biochar. All of those things I think I'd like to see, because we have members asking for different things in different contexts, different climates, which is totally appropriate to their landscape. But it's just not where it's totally considered, I guess, is the short answer. But the longer answer is, and they'll all have their day, but we need to kind of get the program off on the strongest possible footing. And we think that that looks like planting trees initially because everyone can see it. Yeah. And they can't necessarily see those other interventions, Kim. Kim, did you mean to have your hand up?
Yeah, sorry, I thought I was off mute. I really like what we're trying to do here, and I think it's very valuable, particularly for those farmers in the southern tablelands areas and areas where there's been en masse kind of clearing that needs to be repaired. I guess I'm kind of a little bit like the lady you just referred to at Toogoolawah in my area where, I don't necessarily need to plant trees. I have, but we do grow trees here very easily. So it's kind of not the way forward for us, I guess. I would actually be more interested as a farmer to protect ecosystems and protect, remnant pockets better than the Queensland government and federal government currently allow us to do.
I think that's not unfamiliar to me. Like the farmers, would ideally want to be rewarded for the good work that they've done. Unfortunately, we've already paid as farmers several times over through, inabilities to clear. We're sold for Kyoto, and now we're being asked to pay for carbon inherent in the production of the beef that we produce. And there's just so many times that as farmers, the thing we would like, to be paid for won't be seen as additional under the legislation or SBTI compliant. And so we have to work, unfortunately, with the methods that are seen as SBTI compliant and seen as additional. And planting a new tree satisfies both of them. Protecting existing trees and improving their condition may have a biodiversity and nature positive benefit. But as of now, that's not related to the emissions reduction opportunity that the SBTI kind of incentivized buyers are responding to. And as of now, and I'm happy to be told, we aren't being given any price signals or interest in nature positive or biodiversity benefit or in, improved condition of existing trees. We're only being given price signals on additional tangible removal that you can 0.2. And that's what a tree does for now. And that's why we're departing from there. But as the world matures and farmers are on this adoption curve, the supply chains are on this adoption curve, ESG and what's required, mate, it's all a path of discovery. And I think that's what, as the mutual, we don't have all the answers, right? And that's why we're co-designing. But no, it seems to us like at least we should have a farmer-led answer that can, evolve shortly, Kim, to enable nature positive to be valued in a meaningful way. But through this program, it's probably not going to be nature positive. Yeah. It's going to be carbon emissions sequestration, carbon emissions intensity reduction, or a sequestration equivalent. Any other questions? Georgina, I see you're off on camera. It's unlike, have you got a question from the farmer side?
No, just listening, I think, and sort of making some notes in my head.
All right. With your permission, guys. Oh, Andrea, yep.
So do you see so is compliance the main benefit at this point for farmers, or is there a value add that comes through participating in this process?
Oh, well, maybe I haven't said it as clearly, but if you're loaned $50 to grow a tree and it's helping your productivity or improving that land management unit by stabilizing the erosion or controlling the salinity or whatever, providing shade and shelter, and you're basically given a $50 loan for the planting of that tree, on that, 300 trees times $50, that's like being paid 15 grand, whilst developing carbon neutral cattle that, buyers will now like because you can verify it's carbon neutral cattle. And you've got the benefit, I guess, of the productivity benefit, the $15,000 that you've paid, and you've got half of that, let's say, right up front, and the other half coming at the extinguishing of the, when it's observable from space, and that extinguishes the loan. So you've got that full benefit. If we manage, for example, to sell the benefit of that credit for more than the $50 loan, then the farmer gets that benefit on top of that. So they're at best getting $15,000 worth of benefit, but that could rise depending on how many people want to know that that's carbon neutral beef or that's a carbon neutral supply shed. And that's a really good opportunity for us to sort of start to talk about the distinction on the buyer's side between a supply chain and a supply shed, and how some of them are buying emissions reduction in a product, and some of them are buying emissions sequestration that they can then use to inset a portfolio approach, rather than a supply chain approach, which is insetting in a known product chain. So there's more questions, but I will definitely get to them.
Woody, could I ask another question?
Yeah, mate.
So it seems to me the real test, though, is yes, you might get a free loan to go and plant the tree.
Mm-hmm.
But the real test from a farmer's point of view is if the sequestration benefit of that tree is stapled to the beef product I produce, will I get a better price for that product? That's really what we're trying to go after, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's one of the ways we can explore right now. So, yeah.
Because that's the key. That's the key thing. Will we get a better price if we do that? The free loan is kind of neither here nor there for the $15 for the tree.
Well, the price, yeah, let's have a look at the two ways in which we see this coming together. So for the supply chain, they've got this supply chain discovery using United Nations Transparency Protocol. and there's an economic return on investment. So they've got a pricing mechanism that needs to be developed for pooling. So if the farm reduces its carbon emissions, that has benefit to the abattoir, the processor, as that's cows being divided up and put into export or into Coles and Woolies or into the trim into other processors that go to other end consumers. You end up reducing the carbon for a known supply chain. But there is, you know, a lack of coordination around supply chains that a lot of people are actually using supply shed. So we see that the world is today at a supply shed scale, but that potentially where the world is heading is supply chain over the next 3 to 5 years, where you'll get beef priced inherently with the carbon emissions in it. That is possibly one way the world will evolve. But at the moment, it looks like the more mature version of insetting is going to be at the supply shed space. Now, the reason that the supply, partners who buy beef and value add it, or buy beef and turn it into leather and other goods, or is that it's farmer verified and it's verifiable from space. So it's easily observable, and that multiple people can see there's the cows, there's the trees. I can claim that with confidence without the associated greenwashing risk. Now, on-farm tree planting in beef systems can contribute to SBTI flag aligned insetting. If it's within the supply chain, that is clear. If it's within the supply shed, we're still answering that question. If it involves new removals, if it avoids, obvious, what's the word I'm looking for? Risk, credibility issues. We don't want to have people being able to double claim, but at the same time, we want everybody who benefits from the reduction of the whole of farm in the supply chain to help contribute to the costs of that $50 tree in order to get that reduction, which flows onto all of their scope 3s. And we want to obviously align with those who are aligned with us. So just like farmers, there needs to be a discovery process, and they need to enter into an insetting program. They need to understand how the pooling mechanism could work and how co-claimants could work. So we think that there's sort of a pathway where the supply chain variant will provide specific picks where they're looking to offer, the incentive in the beef product. And in that case, what they're getting out of the trees that are planted are tons of SBTI compliant verified emissions reductions. And if we don't have the picks and we don't have supply chain traceability to that level in year one or today, what we're looking at is that sort of supply shed where we provide an inset target, a location, and a volume. And in that case, they're buying X tons of regen verified sequestration credits. And then there is an internal accounting inset rather than through the product. This is a detached payment for sequestration within the same supply shed. So that all comes down into what offers of inset or options to inset are provided to the farmer, so that when the farmer is deciding what they're going to do, how much of their emissions they're going to inset, that could be guided in practical terms by an abattoir that says, we're happy to inset 10% of your beef for a low carbon product. But an abattoir might say, well, we've got no value in a fully carbon neutral product. And so the farmer, instead of, insetting 300 trees worth, might actually be incentivized to inset 10% for a low carbon product and plant 30 trees. This still needs to be discovered. So at this point, I think the real invitation here is to ask Zach and or Steve, I'm not sure which one of you are going to carry the flame, to talk to the distinction between supply chain and supply shed and its relationship to verified claims. Zach,
I came off video and mute, but it's Steve who's planning on doing the presentation. So
cool,
there
mate.
he is.
I probably need to make you a co-host, Stephen. Sorry.
I think the share button's looking good for me. Let's try that. All right, there's a presentation here, which is actually a tweaked version of one that was made for a completely different value chain, which is critical minerals and mining and smelters and refiners. But, you know, the same fundamental concepts apply. This is a presentation about basically digital standards for making activities throughout the supply chain transparent and discoverable and potentially incentivized. And it focuses particularly on bulk commodities and the difference between book and claim. The two chain of custody models. And I know there's several people on this call that understand this stuff much more than I do, so I apologize if I'm sounding simplistic to some, but I just want to highlight the basic difference between two chain of custody models, one which really depends on verifiable supply chain traceability, which is mass balance, and the other one which is kind of independent of whether the claim is associated with a particular product, which is the book and claim model, and how they kind of work together. So anyway, I'll get into it. Gets a little bit technical, and I'll try to go as quick as possible. Firstly, quickly, what is the United Nations Transparency Protocol? It's an interoperability standard, essentially. Think of it like protocol over platform. There are lots and lots of platforms where data is maintained and closed within the platform, but across a whole value chain, there will never be one platform that supports the entire value chain. So data needs to move more freely between systems, between actors, across possibly global value chains. And how do you do that is what the UNTP is about. It works primarily on the basis that data is discoverable. There isn't a direct exchange between one party and the next. It's more like a party publishes and makes discoverable, sometimes with authorization and confidentiality controls, but it depends whether it's public data or not, information about sustainability performance at product or facility level. And it's basically, if you've got an idea of a thing, then you can get data about a thing. Right? And the typical data that's described in the UNTP standard is, one of them is at product level. So a digital product passport, most people are familiar with that concept. It's basically a set of claims made by a producer or a manufacturer about the performance characteristics of a product at either model or batch or even serialized item level. Right? If we're talking cows, they're essentially serialized items, right? Because they've got an NLAS ID in their ear. But equal to at product level, a lot of supply chain transparency kind of ignores products and focuses on facilities. Like, that's a general term, could be a farm or it could be an abattoir or a feedlot or a copper smelter or anything, right? But it's a physical place where material is transformed. And so very similarly, whether you're looking at facility level or product level, if you've got an idea of a facility or an idea of a product, you should be able to find public data and potentially more private data about that ideal product. But those two green things are basically ambit claims, right? They're just disclosures or claims made by the producer or facility. So how can you trust them? The answer is, well, you may want some sort of third-party attestation, whether that's a physical farm visit or whether it's a satellite survey or some sort of independent evidence of the veracity of the claims. Here's a digital credential that says this product or this facility has met these criteria. And then the last part of UNTP is, how do you glue input products to output products so that you can start to explore entire value chains. And that's what traceability events are about. So for example, a kill lot of cows turns into a whole heap of packaged meat. There'd be one traceability event that says this kill lot led to these products. Anyway, that's just an overview of what is UNTP. What we'll do now is try and apply it to a agricultural value chain, a typical one. Obviously, there are many different variants of this, but here's one that's just kind of a simple but common model for, I think, the red meat industry. And see how those various UNTP bits and pieces fit into this supply chain and how they work at these two chain of custody levels. Right? So farm to sale yard to feedlot to processor to manufacturer to retailer is just one. Everybody's familiar with that, I think. First of all, it's about making visible the performance data of each of these facilities. We'll start at facility and we'll move to product later. So if a digital facility record, that's what the DFR stands for, is discoverable given a PIC or an ABN or an NFAS or whatever the identifier scheme is that registers that facility, then there's a consistent way to reach that data. I've drawn it here as if it's passed from actor to actor, but it doesn't actually work like that. Now, each actor just publishes the data linked to the identifier, and anyone that knows the identifier and has access, and if it's public data, they don't need to have any access control, can discover it. So, for example, let's say a farm is publishing a facility record that makes claims about their carbon offsets at farm level or their deforestation status or whatever. They push cattle through a sale yard and a feedlot, and very often those guys are maybe, especially the sale yard, maybe not that interested in that information. They're just, perhaps they will be, but they may not participate in the data exchange. So how would a meat processor discover that verifiable information? By the way, all these credentials are digitally signed. That's what a little padlock means. So you can attribute the data to the party that signed it to be sure that it hasn't changed, hasn't been corrupted, and is linked to an identity. But here you can see how a bank that might have a loan portfolio of, I don't know, 1,000 PICs can assess the carbon footprint of their loan portfolio. That would be the bank scope 3. And a food processor, similarly, even if they're not receiving data through a sale yard or a feedlot, because the NLAS ID is linked to a PIC, they can get the farm data through the RFID tag on the cow. So this is basically making transparent and putting back in the hands of the each actor what they choose to publish and making it discoverable in a consistent, scalable way. Then, like I said, those facility records are really just claims made by the producer. To make them verifiable and trustworthy, some actor, could be someone like Regen, could be a formal certification body, or whatever the regulatory scheme is, or that's controlling this, does audits and produces these conformity credentials, which are also discoverable exactly the same way. Right? So if I know an ID of a PIC, I can get the facility record and perhaps a deforestation credential or a audited emissions credential. Sometimes, and this comes more from critical minerals than agriculture, so you guys can tell me how important this is in agriculture. There is a requirement for actors way downstream, like Ford Motor Company or Microsoft, to be confident about where the raw materials came from in their product without necessarily knowing who are all the actors in between. And an extension to the digital facility record can allow declarations of, let's say, carbon intensity or whatever it is, to be passed from actor to actor and aggregated as you go, so that at the end, there's some sort of information about, well, for this electric vehicle battery, these are all the smelters that possibly were involved in my supply chain. It's not the same as being audited numbers, but this idea of aggregating facility performance level information from one facility to the next, so that it's accessible by the end actor is one of the key ideas in critical minerals, and may have applicability in farming. But let's get to the financial incentives, right? So one of the challenges with traceability and transparency is, well, it takes a bit of instrumentation, right? It depends on participation of software providers like AgriWebb and others to build this kind of instrumented supply chain. And even if you have it, very often the willingness to pay something, no matter how little, for sustainability improvements is at the downstream end. And it's hard for those incentives to flow all the way through various actors in a value chain, through price margins all the way back to the farmer or the primary producer, who actually has the biggest impact, right? So supply shed ideas or book and claim ideas decoupled from traceability evidence is one way to push incentives right from where they're demanded, if you like, to where they're actioned. So in this picture here, you see a regional supply shed working with a number of actors, and each actor is providing evidence and booking performance claims, right? So this is my farm level emissions this year and next year and so on, and so booking improvements essentially in our story by planting trees. Now someone wants to buy those, right? In this example, it's perhaps the manufacturer of packaged food who wants to attach to their brand some reduced carbon footprint, but doesn't do it through individual traceability and proof through product level traceability, is basically doing it by buying tokens from the regional supply shed. And so they're acquitted too, right? So you can't double spend these things. A bunch of farms book insets with regen, and somebody buys them and the regen balance goes down, right? And if they pay more than the $50 I heard, maybe the farmer gets an extra bonus. I'm not sure in this context how that manufacturer can, if you like, legally claim a sort of an informal scheme in their scope 3 reductions. It's a question for Wardy and Rowan in a minute, but that's basically the book and claim model, right? Where we can start to slowly, it takes time, to instrument the supply chain in a kind of traceability sense as well, right? So that heifer has an RFID tag in their ear. Linked to that RFID tag can be a livestock passport discoverable from it. We've done some pilots and prototypes of proving that's quite feasible. In that passport is much the same sort of environmental performance claims, but now instead of at the granularity of a farm, it's at the granularity of a cow. And obviously, in this particular step, when cows are consumed and meat comes out, that DPP is at the granularity of that batch or package of meat. There's some allocation here that needs to be verified. But that's the flow of information at product level. So it could be that there's some price incentives when these DPPs start to demonstrate improved sustainability performance through this value chain. There's a question too about when this manufacturer here buys, or basically claims emissions reductions from the supply shed, can they then embed those emissions reductions into the products they produce? If this part didn't exist, can they do that? This goes to different countries, different rules, different sectors about exactly how you avoid double counting and what can be counted and what can't. Some work to do here, I think, Wardy and Rowan, to figure out what you can legally do here, but it's technically feasible. So this is where that commercial incentives start to come in. When you start to go, well, that's very nice that you've made a claim that your product level emissions is X. There is, and especially if you start to get price incentives for that, as soon as you get price incentives for something, there's also incentives to fake it, of course, right? And the whole industry needs to be protected from lowest common denominator performance, and reducing the value of these claims if they become unverifiable. So we get into who is the auditor or checking that the inputs match the outputs at any particular point in this value chain. I've drawn it here at the processor of packaged meat, but you could draw exactly the same little quota management thing. Pretty much any actor in this value chain, anybody that transforms something from an input to an output. And so this is basically just a way to add confidence to the ambit claims made in DPPs through some sort of third-party audit that, you know, the allocation of carbon that you've made to the collection of products going out more or less matches your input in a mass balance sense. This is the mass balance chain of custody approach working right now. It's being done already, not in agriculture as far as I know, but in by, for example, Clean Energy Regulator issuing guarantee of origin certificates around energy products, like, not that there's much of it, but green hydrogen and the like. And around the world, these sort of things starting to happen. Right? So this is how kind of product level claims and facility level claims kind of work together, and how they get verified at either the regional supply shed level or at the individual facility mass balance level in this model. And finally, maybe we will involve this sale yard after all. And if this was the critical mineral supply chain, and we were talking copper billets or they call them cathodes, big slabs of pure copper, there is a lot of commodity trading going on between the producer and the consumer of these goods. Sometimes they can be sold 4 or 5 times. And the commodity traders are very, very sensitive about revealing supply information. I want to sell you a thing with these qualities, but I don't want to tell you where I got it from. Right? So the whole architecture also needs to accommodate selective redaction and privacy preserving exchange of data, particularly where there's trader sensitivities involved. That's another part of UNTP. So that's basically the picture. The questions that occur to me are, what's the governance model here? Who can be a quota manager at a supply shed? And what authority do they have to do that? Now, industry associations, long before all this, have had a kind of a pattern, member associations, of acting in the interests of their members, but also acting in ensuring the reputation and quality of their industry as a whole, right? You don't, if you're a whiskey distillers membership association, the last thing you want is one of your members putting flavored alcohol on the shelf instead of properly matured whiskey, right? So there is a natural incentive to keep everyone honest, and everybody wants the member association to keep all the others honest. So it does seem to me that a member association is a kind of plausible, natural quota manager. It's not obvious to me yet how this member association or that member association gets some sort of, I don't know, assessment or accreditation or endorsement, if you like, to be a quota manager and to make these claims. Then you get into this, the questions have been asked, what, you know, how do you balance larger scale offsetting schemes in a nationally regulated sense with these smaller scale insetting schemes? And, you know, that's at facility level. And then at product level, what's the relationship between formalized guarantee of origin schemes, often run by regulators, and these industry run schemes? And is there a risk of double counting? You know, can I plant 20 hectares of trees and claim benefits with WARDI, but also register them with CER and ACU? And then who's checking that the farmer hasn't registered the same set of things twice? These are questions I don't know the answers to necessarily, but I can see that at some point, the more uptake of all these things that have any sort of financial incentive, the more risk there is of, you know, perverse behavior, right? So figuring all this out is one of our challenges, I think. What does this mean? How does all this basically generic UN stuff map to what Regen's doing? Well, there's Regen issuing farm level conformity credentials about offsets through tree planting, or insets, I'm sorry, through tree planting to producers, that they can be sold either indirectly, I mean, via this book and claim supply shed, that's that purple token at the bottom, or included in the carbon footprint of the cow passport. And again, there's some sort of verifiable okay, you've claimed this much offset in the farm and you've got this many cows. Is the balance more or less right? Are you claiming, are you if you've planted 50 trees and you've got 200 cows, you can probably only claim a 20% or so benefit, right? And who's checking that? And then here we've got Rabobank basically finding those facility records and the backup evidence for them and assessing their scope 3 footprint. And here we've got Greenhams and Tarosi receiving product level stuff. They can also, and I think in this example, Tarosi's, not trying to put words in anyone's mouth here, but basically claiming reductions from the supply shed approach. So, both of these approaches can work, facility or region or, farm level book and claim, which is completely decoupled from a verifiable value chain, and product level evidence, even supported, and pricing incentives that go with it. How they work together and how you avoid double counting and how you, at various levels is, I think, a thing to figure out. Right, so next steps for us, I think, are to sort of mock all this up, test its technical feasibility and also its business value as towards, through the rest of this program. And that's it from me. Does that help? I don't know. Questions? Far away.
That was helpful. I'm just going to put my facilitator hat on. I know Katie McRobert, I forgot to get to you at the important part of the farmer journey. And I know you need to go. So, Katie, can I get you to talk to what you're seeing policy level at the Australian Farm Institute that's relevant here?
Thanks, Wardy. And I think you mentioned earlier, specifically in relation to those traceability initiatives and the work that we've been undertaking with National Farmers Federation and DAF on the Australian Ag Sustainability Framework. So hopefully most people in this call have a level of familiarity with the traceability strategy. I won't go into too much detail, but just as a reminder, the National Ag Traceability Strategy has a couple of pressing challenges that it's seeking to address, and those are largely around alignment and reducing compliance burden. The ones that are more specific in this particular case, there's 8 established objectives. One of them is about meeting new and emerging product claim requirements and changing market demands, and that would tie into this requirement to produce a new product into the market, being the inset accreditation or credential, depending. Try not to use words that I know are trigger words for people. We're not necessarily saying accreditation in the third-party verified sense. Maybe we are. I'm sort of losing track, to be honest. There's been a lot of discussions about this week already, but don't get hung up too much on the semantics. So the traceability initiatives go across a range of things, all the way from biosecurity through to sustainability attributes, through to health and provenance, all provenance claims as well. The Ag Sustainability Framework, as an overarching piece of work, looks to try and pull together a number of these different things that are happening across ag, at least under a set of national priorities that say, well, this is what we know will impact the sustainability of agriculture from an environmental and social and governance perspective. And so here are those key principles that we all need to keep in mind. So traceability feeds into the key principles of being able to demonstrate your sustainability credentials, being able to demonstrate your compliance with various regulations as well, and being good corporate citizens. Now, from a global perspective, AFI works a lot with global partners as well. There's been, of course, a big political shift recently with the US walking back from many of its sustainability initiatives, walking back from climate commitments and all the rest, that there was a fear in agriculture that there'd be then a disincentive to be involved in these kinds of programs. But what we're seeing, in fact, is almost a doubling down from a lot of our partners. Europe is continuing on its trajectory to improve environmental outcomes within agricultural production systems. They're not increasing that. They're not ramping up efforts. One person said literally to me in Brussels just a couple of months ago, it's not that we're going to stop being green, we're just not going to get any more green than we currently are. So environmental sustainability remains extremely important to them. However, they are looking to repurpose subsidies and support into underpinning the profitability of farms in Europe. And that also means looking at ways that they can get payment for environmental services like this into their structures and into their policies as well. Similarly, in Southeast Asia, what we often here reflected back in Australia is just, oh, well, you can't talk to people in Asia about sustainability when they're more concerned about food security. You know, if someone's having trouble producing enough food for their own population, then sustainability is just a luxury that they can't afford. Again, I dispute that claim. Maybe politically, that's the message that's going through, not so much at a policy level, but from politics. We held a 2-day workshop with the Department of Ag in Jakarta, including a range of Southeast Asian partners, Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, everyone in the region, really. And the work that we're hearing that's going on the ground, certainly the researchers and people working within agri-systems, agri-food systems, they're very aware that sustainability in terms of farming within the limits that your environment and your culture and your society will allow is driving a lot of the work that's happening there. So again, they're looking for ways to value add in terms of providing environmental benefit with alongside farming systems so that they can improve economics in their country and also make sure that they don't just strip mine the place to produce food. So sustainability is certainly top of mind. It might not feature in headlines or it might feature in a different way, but all of those drivers that we've seen over the past 5 years are there, but more as an undercurrent as opposed to headline reports. Honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing because we've also seen a great deal of virtue signalling from a lot of big players in recent years, whether that's virtue signalling on the political stage or from a lot of large companies that publish statements about being regenerative without any verification or understanding of what that means. So taking that sort of flag waving out of it so that people are now focused more on the pragmatic and practical aspects of what true sustainability on farm means, not just in Australia, but with our trading partners and within the region, is certainly what we're seeing coming through. Does that give enough of context there, Woody?
That is perfect. Thank you, Katie. So just to round out that we've enjoyed people being able to take time, but we are sort of coming up to the top of the hour when everybody's probably going to want to head off. So where I'd like to end us today ultimately is that I'm going to ask if there are people who either watching the video or out, you know, in the call today want to participate in the scoping of this concept. So that would look at, you know, commencement term, overhead, pricing, key things. There's clearly farmer coordination and buyer coordination. So what are the other interventions into the future? How can Toogoolawah clear trees and get rewarded? How can Kim protect trees and get rewarded? How can we set ourselves up to handle the AASF reporting requirements like Katie just described? How would buyers, you know, do discovery with this product? And what things do they need to capture in their SBTIs, etc.? So we have got a form here, which I will put in the chat right now, which enables anybody to add to this. I'll also put it in the YouTube video of this event and socials and stuff. But basically, what we'd like to be able to do is bring people together to move from concept, like what we are today, into a properly scoped project that, you know, could stand up to a beef industry discussion with the MLA or with Cattle Australia or with a farming association and say, this is credible, this is tangible, we can make this real. So in the last 10 minutes, and appreciating that this is a rare opportunity to get so many people from different fields in the room, if I could ask people to tell us, you know, good, bad, better, right? So what was good about what you saw today? What's bad, right? And it's easy to say, you know, it doesn't look like my context or it's not going to work for me. And better is what could be done by either you or us in this concept to address the bad. So it'll be super quick, maybe a minute per person because we've got like 20 of us online. And Andrea, you're in my top left, so I'm gonna kick off with you. You're also on camera.
I'll pass because I've already had a lot to say, and I think it'd be better to hear from others.
Okay, my next is Peter Richardson. Peter, what was good? What was bad? What can we do better?
Well, I might skip over that and just tell you what the pressing issue that bangs on my head is, and that is I'm just struggling to understand or make some progress on buy-side demand. So what I really want to understand is what's the buy. I can see how there's lots of clever mechanisms that we can come up with for delivering on what you're talking about, and that's all terrific. But how do we know what the buy-side demand is, and how do we know what is it that the buyer is going to want in order to pay something? That's the bit that I'm sort of missing. I kind of feel like there needs to be some more work on the buyer side.
Yep.
Yep.
So can I infer that you're comfortable though with the good might be you're okay with the farmer flow, unsure about the discovery or the motive?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole concept I think potentially marries really nicely from the farmer side and scales down well, which is the key thing. But I just need to have some confidence that a buyer will pay.
Great.
Yep.
Next on my screen is Mary King.
Thanks. That's probably a tiny little pass there. Yeah, thank you. So really appreciate you bringing everyone together, Wardy. I think it's really critical that that the industry overall starts to collaborate on some of these solutions. And for a company like McDonald's, we've got these big SBTI targets. And just, I don't know how familiar people are with SBTI targets. Sometimes it's a name that's just thrown around, but really base level. Essentially, it means that we as a company have signed up to play our part into keeping global warming to under 1.5 degrees as per the Paris Climate Agreement. Okay, that's a really simple piece in it. It's taken about 2 to 3 years for people far smarter than me and Chicago headquarters to work with the people at SBTI to come up with all of the different pieces of the puzzle to reach these goals. From an Australian perspective, and this is from a global perspective, our Scope 3 emissions profile on beef outstrips anything else from our business. It outstrips the restaurants, transport, logistics, anything else. We've got to solve this problem. Scope 3 starts on farm, obviously, for us, so that is why I'm really appreciative of these conversations to look for solutions on farm. For me, at the moment, the big piece, and it would almost be a go, no go for us in terms of moving forward with any form of process, is that MMRV piece. Now, I know that you've spoken about the certification, the verification piece. I'd really need to see some detail around that, because my understanding at the moment is whilst it's really important that we're supporting practices on farm that look at soil health and that biodiversity piece, which is increasing in terms of focus for a company like McDonald's, nature positive, and heading towards our overall 2030 goals about supporting nature positive. For us, for a company like McDonald's to invest in anything, it has got to absolutely have a verifiable, that really strong MMRV piece from the beginning. So that was just that's just a comment from the start for a company like McDonald's in particular to better understand. And I would probably go so far as to say I'm not quite sure who else from a retailer perspective, if there's anyone else on the call, but I'd almost say that they'd be saying exactly the same thing. So just as a comment, but thanks for starting the conversation, guys. I really appreciate it.
Excellent. Next on my screen is Georgina Johnson. Good, bad, better.
I'd sort of go based off what Peter and Mary just said. Half of my brain's thinking from Peter's perspective is how would this be communicated to farmers en masse, and how would you get those regional groups to create a greater resilience cohort for companies like McDonald's to feel confident, or from all their existing suppliers to feel confident and be able to step into the process, and what sort of the infrastructure required in their supply chains in terms of skills and actually roles created to be able to engage in this process of transition. And then the other half of me is thinking about from a buyer perspective, and how fast this will actually take place will depend on whether it's for national consumption or export market consumption. You know, if it's for Europe and the US, they're obviously a bit further ahead, whereas I feel like in this conversation in Australia, we're still very much at the starting gate, and coming back to what Mary just identified, you know, I've been having conversations with organisations like FMG and Coles and Woolworths recently, and really I'm actually not talking to their sustainability individuals, I'm talking to their compliance and risk individuals, because that's where really this conversation's sitting. And so how do we create that assurance that Mary was just speaking to, that's not on a small scale but a large scale, and then what does the financial enablement around that actually look like, and the money that we need to see, you know, to meet that 2030 target. So my brain's sort of heading in all directions, but I think one thing that's great is that I think we can't underestimate the fact that these are complex conversations, and we need to just start somewhere and start to nut them out. And rather than go that siloed approach, it's really, really important as we look at that infrastructure and supply chain challenges that we have in meeting those targets, that we start to collaborate more. So, and the only way to do that is to start talking and to stop saying that we've all got to figure it out, because, you know, a lot of we don't really know how to do it just yet, and that's completely fine. But it's more important that we have a good crack, kind of like what Cargill's doing with remunerating their farmers, having a good crack right now. So I would love to see more companies like that stepping up, and how can we, rather than criticise how they're doing it, actually support engagement to make those big steps. So all good on my front, and just sort of trying to synthesise it. Yeah.
Thank you, Georgina. Look, on my given the time, I'm going to ask Claire Marnie, with your experience, and Zoe Marshall from Tarosi to please give comments. Sorry, Zoe, you can't go 2 hours without me asking.
Oh, thanks, Woody. Good. From my perspective, I'll just start before Claire. Data integrity is key, and that verification piece and that MRV piece is key. We need to be able to trust the data that's coming through our system from an auditability perspective to be able to put any claims against anything. We are personally not looking at putting product claims. We don't see a consumer market for that at the moment in terms of a carbon neutral beef. While that's out there, there's not enough of a market space for it. Consumers, from my perspective, and they're expecting this as a business as usual rather than a value add to their purchasing decisions. But it's also really important from my perspective that supply chain is engaging with farmers and with people back down their supply chain to work through how can we support you guys to make this sustainability transition with both the Regen farming practices, emission reduction strategy, and further sort of biodiversity metrics and other things that come on board as we go forward. So really good in concept. I think from starting with trees, great, but for us, we need that traceability from whole life cycle for that cow, essentially, to be able to look at any sort of emission reduction, like emission removal claims associated with trees. Reductions are actually easier at the moment in terms of claiming versus removals. Removals is harder, and there's a lot more uncertainty around that permanence piece, whereas there's a lot more metrics and a lot more methodologies out there around that reduction part at the moment.
Thanks, Zoe. And Claire, you're going to get the final word for today.
Well, in terms of good, I think you've really collectively thought about a lot of things. You know, my recommendation based on our experience at Athen is that the supply shared concept and the book and claim approach is critical to achieve impact at scale. And I would just flag that there is actually a lot of guidance around the governance that's required for that from Value Change Initiative, and yeah, it'd be great to get consistency around those discussions. We, just from our experience at Athen, we did end up being approved globally as a registry, so we can operate in the same way, even though we're entirely focused on insetting. We do have the same approval as VIA and Gold Standard in terms of having the methodologies or protocols to claim against that dictate then the MMRV that's required. So yeah, there's a lot in that governance aspect, and probably just to sort of provide a little input too in terms of experience. So Athens paid out over $6 million to farmers in the last 6 months, but it's all been driven by the offtake partner. So having the offtake partner on board, being able to meet their MMRV requirements, and ensuring that you're actually able to meet their SBTI targets. So we had a long discussion the other day about the difference between removals and reductions. So yeah, that pull through from the offtake partners is critical, and their willingness to pay for specific types of credits is important to understand.
Claire, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate 2 hours of your valuable time on a Friday, 11 to 1. We've covered a bit of ground. I would invite you, and I will send out the recording of this along with the link. But for those that are interested in participating in the scoping of this, so we move from concept to scope, please do join us. We've got to get into the detail, but hopefully as a result of that, we can actually create a product that's farmer friendly, context specific, easy, simple, observable from space, and meets the needs of buyers, lots of them. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Waddy. Thanks, Ryan. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.